We're going to call to order the June 19th meeting of the West Sacramento City Council Redevelopment Successor Agency and Financing Authority. We're going to begin tonight as we do each week with the Pledge of Allegiance. So we'd like to invite our guests to join the council and staff in the pledge, which tonight is going to be led by the Chief of the West Sacramento Police Department, Chief Dan Drummond. Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands. All right, the council did meet in closed session this evening to confer with our real property negotiator regarding the sale of the West Capitol Avenue and South River Road properties that are indicated on our closed session printed agenda. Also to confer with our legal counsel regarding the two existing litigation cases that are in our printed agenda, and to confer with our labor negotiator regarding negotiations with the Police Management Association. And on all of those items, no action was taken. That brings us to item 1A, which is presentations by the public on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the City Council. As is noted on our agenda, state law prohibits us from taking up items that are brought up under item 1A, but it is an important opportunity for a public forum on those areas that are within the city's jurisdiction. We do ask that anyone wishing to address the council on this or any other item tonight to please fill out one of the yellow cards that is available near the front door and to turn it into the city clerk. In front of the clerk is a timer that we use to make sure that everyone gets the chance to be heard, and to that end, we ask that all comments be limited to no more than 3 minutes. We take the yellow cards all the way up to the conclusion of the staff report on any individual agenda item. So if you're here for agenda item 78 and you want to speak on that item, we'll take the card up until the time the staff is done with their presentation. Once the council discussion and the public testimony begins, we don't take any additional cards. So please turn the card in as soon as the urge strikes that you want to provide some comments on an agenda item. Also in front of the clerk is a flip chart, and that flip chart simply indicates which agenda item the council is currently considering. We know that for some folks, testifying at a podium on TV in public can cause a little bit of anxiety, so we do ask that there not be any boos or catcalls or even applause or other demonstrations, and that we try to maintain a civil discourse in our chambers. With that, we have one request to speak on item 1A, and that's by Mr. Bill Lowell.
Record checking there. Thank you. Once again, I used the number 40 bus, and no stop up there on Jefferson and Sacramento Avenue. So the bus goes all the way around, and it doesn't stop at that corner until after it goes by Walmart. And if we put in a stop there, which again I think that we used to have one at that corner, but it got aced out of there somehow. But if somebody like me wanted to shop over there at that corner where the Broderick Post Office is, why, we could get off and go shopping over there, and if we did it fast enough, why, we could pick up that same number 40 bus as it comes back around from Walmart. And you're always encouraging people to shop locally, so it seems like it'd be a very easy step to take to put in that bus stop. It could always be relocated when we eventually get some kind of a new construction there. And I don't know how I can, like I say, you might want to try taking the bus there on a non-weekday when a number 41 doesn't run anymore, and see how much more time it takes, and so it discourages people from shopping locally there. So I say we need to reverse that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, that's the only request we have under item 1A, so we're going to proceed to item 1B, which is council communications. Are there any reports or other communications this evening? Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. Give me just a moment here to pull up. On last week ago, Monday, on June 10th, I attended the Water Resources Association of Yolo County meeting in Woodland. There was just some informational presentations that day, including discussion on the proposed state water bond, how that might impact some of the water agencies in Northern California, as well as we received an update on everyone's favorite subject of the Woodland-Davis Service Water Supply Project. And then also of the, we received an interesting report from the City of Davis on a pilot study they did on chromium-6, which was interesting, and they had reported that they were provide those studies back to our Public Works Department as a heads up to them, because there were some interesting findings on that study. On this past Monday, I attended the Board of Directors meeting for the Yolo County Natural Habitat JPA, where we discussed and approved an audit finding from, we received and approved an audit finding for the JPA, where the audit was, okay, I'm done.
Madam Clerk, could you give Mr. Ledesma just another 30 seconds?
Thank you.
Or whatever he needs.
He's bending the rules for me. But we received the audit findings from the auditor for the JPA, which, as many know, was we had discovered quite a few financial issues with the JPA management issues last year. There's good news and bad news. First of all, the audit had some findings we have to take care of. The good news is there's no surprises there. So all the work that we had done for the past year on the management committee of the NH Natural Habitat Plan JPA team, myself, Supervisor Saylor, and Supervisor Provenza, as well as the other board members, we were quite happy with it because they had found everything that our executive director and our attorneys had gone through and found. So nothing was a surprise. We're already made many of the changes they had asked for, so that was good. We also got an update on the plan itself. We are still expecting the first administrative draft to be done by the end of this month and released on July 1st. And that will start a series of meetings between the JPA staff and then come back to this council is to provide some further direction on what to do as a next step for the JPA. So that's all I have for today. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kristoff.
Yeah, very briefly, Mr. Mayor. On June 13th, West SAFCA met, and we heard the presentation from the 200-year flood protection information that we will be hearing tonight again. They wanted to, this was for West SAFCA as the presentation we heard, and this one's for the council. Both the same presentation, so it's just very important information that was required that Department of Water Resources give to various jurisdictions. And so that was the main item of attention that we had.
Mr. Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Last week, the Regional Sanitation District met. Nothing major to report. The 10th, the Yolo County Transportation District, we met. We adopted a 13-14 budget, and we received an update on the streetcar project and the bike share program and some other things that aren't major. And then the Upper West Sac Executive Board met earlier today at lunch, and all's well there as well. That's it.
All right, thank you. I met with Congressman Garamendi at an emergency meeting after our last council meeting, that when the council considered an update on the congressman's conceptual alternative plan for the Delta that included converting our deep water ship channel into the peripheral canal, essentially. So he came by to City Hall 2 days later to explain, first to apologize for not having consulted with or briefed the city prior to a national announcement about running the Purple Canal right through our city, and then secondly to provide more background around what their thinking is. I went through the issues and the concerns that we had discussed 2 weeks ago, and let him know that our formal letter of concern about that project, both from the city and separately from the Port Commission, would be coming to him as well. Mr. Tuttle, did you just press your mic? Oh, all right. And asked him what he anticipated in terms of next steps. He didn't identify any at this stage, although I have seen this proposal now appear in some of the other Delta communications. So I don't know how live it is, but it's certainly it's something that I know staff is paying attention to, and in the various water and Delta agencies that we all serve on as well, to make sure that we're ahead of that issue. Speaking of that, the Delta Commission is going to be meeting next week too, and we expect to be appointing a new executive director at that time to replace Mike Machado. Then earlier this week, the Executive Committee for the Sacramento Area Council of Governments met, and we took up the issue that by now was no secret to this council because we've talked about it a few times, which is the implementation of the blueprint and the issues around the ability of SACOG to provide analysis and comments on projects that are pending at the request of the local agency or a member of the local agency's governing board. If an elected official requests that analysis, SACOG has provided it. 90-something% of the analysis has been positive, and there have been a couple high-profile projects where it hasn't. And we've been in 4 to 6 month large-scale, region-wide conflagration around the future of that policy, and also its relationship to FEMA mapping and the flood investment strategy, DWR's flood work, as well as our CEQA exemptions and our coverage by the Delta Stewardship Council regulations. So our executive committee met on Monday and unanimously moved forward a resolution of SACOG that reaffirms the full support of the organization for the blueprint itself, and also that reaffirms the same implementation approach that we have been using. So that same staff level analysis and comment. There's been an extensive amount of briefing over the last couple of months with both the new SACOG board members, because of when the original blueprint was adopted, there are only 3 current SACOG board members who were members of the board at that time. Myself and Steve Miklos, and I can't remember who the third one is, Steve Miklos from Folsom and one other. So there's been a lot of briefing that's occurred since that time, and there is now a broad consensus around that. And I believe all of the various civic and other organizations, business organizations, and others in the region have either weighed in support of that proposal that was approved on Monday, or will do so tomorrow at the full board meeting. So that should resolve that question, and then it'll be communicated because we've had inquiries from FEMA and the Corps concerned about whether the blueprint really was still in effect, and so this will resolve that, and it'll be communicated to them immediately so that any of the hiccups that we've experienced in terms of concerns from the federal and state agencies around whether or not they need to be more aggressively regulating places like West Sacramento should go away. So our expectation is that will happen tomorrow, probably by a broad, if not a unanimous vote, pretty close at the Board of Directors. All right, we have no appointments this evening, so next is the consent agenda, items 2 through 10, and I believe the city manager is dying to show us some renderings on item 7, and I know he spent a lot of time with a paintbrush making them, so we'll want to take a look at those. Are there other items on consent that members of the council wish to remove, or any item for separate question or comment?
Question on 4.
I'm sorry, I had a question on 1, and we're bringing up 7.
1?
2, excuse me. And 7, just a quick question on number 2.
Great. All right. Item 2 is consideration of financing authority, Resolution 13-38, declaring the official intent of the West Sacramento Financing Authority to reimburse itself and the City of West Sacramento with the proceeds of the lease revenue bond financing in connection with the Riverfront Hotel Conference Center project. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. And I think this question is, I just want to make sure we don't have an agreement with this group yet.
That's
this
correct.
is just the authorization. Should we start reimbursing ourselves? We have it, correct?
Well, what we want to do is we want to get a resolution in place in advance of any agreement that just within 60 days prior to this date, all costs that we've expended, let's say for due diligence on that project, could be reimbursed from a bond issuance should we proceed with one. So really the resolution just allows us to start accruing costs that could be reimbursed.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure there was no other until we have a firm agreement in place.
Mr. Christoph.
I have a question too on this one. I guess at what point and where are we going to really start to say this project is a reality, we're pushing this project and everything else? And the reason I'm asking that is because one of the issues that I've had is labor peace. And I just want to make sure that we don't drop the ball on that, because, you know, there's certainly a number of issues that surround labor peace. But, I mean, I would like to make sure that I don't have something slip by that I haven't really had the opportunity to talk to my fellow council members or anything about, or the community from the DSF here.
Yeah, and this isn't that.
I understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. This is not there.
Correct.
So when are we going to start to put this project together?
Well, Mr. Christoph, our plan, staff is aggressively working on a presentation with the developers for our July 17th meeting.
Okay,
so that
great.
would be the opportunity to really dive into that and give
Okay.
us clear direction.
Okay, super.
All right,
Thank you.
All right, item 4 is consideration of Resolution 13-43, establishing appropriation limits for fiscal year 2013-14 based on population and income factors. Mr. Christoph.
I get asked this all the time. What exactly is our population? I mean, I know it's between 46 and 50 or 48 and 50, but what is our population?
Well, the population right now is just under 50,000.
Just
But not
Yeah.
4,000.
Yeah, you want an exact number.
okay. All right.
This is on a need-to-know basis.
Uh-oh, here comes. Watch out.
Thank you.
Our latest research in housing is 49,215, I believe.
Okay.
But that was yesterday, and I saw somebody move in.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Blumberg. All right, item 7 is consideration of approval of the plans and specifications and authorization to solicit bids for the Pioneer Bluff Bridge project. And are we going to see the, you want to bring
Mr.
up
Davidson will make that presentation.
we don't need the full presentation, just
No,
getting to the
it's
pretty pictures.
presentation
And then
here.
Mayor
I
Pro Tem
brought
has a
some
question.
different slides and exhibits to show you guys as far as signalized intersections and signalized driveways that we're proposing. Once they get up there on the You guys have any questions? Okay. Well, what we'll do is we'll, we put them out down here? Okay.
Yeah, there's a big screen of the projector that's not working. All right, so just to summarize, it's a picture of two things holding up a bridge over some water, right?
Correct.
All right. So, Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
No, I was going through this and making sure that, I know you're showing traffic signals, and we're articulating that, but just, were those planned based on traffic studies we're anticipating, or, that's what I didn't.
What we do, at 15th Street and South River Road, that is based on a traffic analysis and traffic study that was done that determined that we would need a traffic signal at that location. And then at Clark Pacific and Clark Trucking, we've been working with those property owners probably for the past 8 years. We initially started to work with them when we had the initial South River Road Bridge project and Village Parkway Extension, and we started working with them again with this project when we received the funding, and that was, and also Ramus Oil Company as well.
Right.
Their particular signals, you can see them there. There's Clark Pacific and there's Clark Trucking. They had concerns as far as safety about pulling their trucks in and out of their driveways, introducing possibly a lot of cars to this roadway where before there weren't. It was a dead end. It was a cul-de-sac, so they didn't have that problem before. So in working with them, we looked at roundabouts. The roundabouts were kind of tight in that area. It was where the signals are, and it was going to be hard for them to maneuver around them. So then we moved over to traffic signals. These particular traffic signals will be activated. They can be activated whether the cars are traveling north and south on South River Road or by the two trucking companies themselves. The idea is when their trucks do pull up that it'll activate it and give them enough time to pull their trucks out safely.
Okay. And part of my questions, I'll let you show the rest of the pictures in a second if you don't. Part of the question was around some past experience that we've had on occasion in the city where along Jefferson between the Barge Canal and Lake Washington where an extra light went in and we didn't really know why and so but anyway, I'm just trying to make sure that we think about the implementation, kind of this traffic pattern. There's some thought behind it, so that we don't put a traffic signal somewhere when we actually needed it somewhere else.
Right.
So that's what I was getting at.
Those two particular traffic signals, we'll be able to regulate how we want to do the timing and just monitor them. And so it's going to probably take some time once we introduce traffic to that area to kind of adjust them and get them in sync.
Thank you.
I'm just to underscore exactly the same point, because Jefferson, it is, I know we know the reasons, I think, why we have all the signals, but there's too many. I mean, it's very annoying and frustrating for drivers and everybody else to use. And so being judicious about making sure we're only putting signals where we really need them at the built-out condition is, right. I think, important. So these are fine, but we need to. We shouldn't put them just to make it more convenient. We really should be balancing the costs and benefits to all the users of the road as we go forward. So these two are fine, but if we add another 5, then we've destroyed this corridor as a real viable alternative.
I understand.
Okay. Did you want to show the other pictures?
We have a couple other pictures. That's the 15th Street intersection. It's going to be signalized. Basically, we have coming from 15th Street towards South River Road. We have a through and a left turn designated, and also a designated right turn. And then also heading north and south and east direction, we have a designated left as well as a through. Not a whole lot to that particular intersection. This is a bridge. It's West El Camino Avenue Bridge in Sacramento. Here we just wanted to demonstrate the pedestrian overlooks that we've designed for this bridge. It won't have a concrete railing like that, but it'll be a steel picket railing, but similar. It'll be tiered and it'll be out over the water about 8 feet, and it's about 15 feet wide on both sides of the bridge. This is our schedule. We just
that we have. So I just for time purposes,
okay.
If we could see the renderings, because we have all the item is still on consent. We just wanted to pull the renderings up. But you had one other the actual bridge rendering, right?
There's at the very beginning.
Right, we skipped past it to get to the question, so that one.
That's the bridge rendering. It's a golden picket railing, and it'll be 8 spans, and it'll look very similar to that.
Great. So, terrific. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. So with that, we have the consent agenda items 2 through 10 before us. It's been moved by Mr. Villegas and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 11 is a public hearing on Senate Bill 244 analysis and approval of draft 2013 to 2021 housing element.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. Tonight we are here for you in a public hearing regarding the city's draft housing element, and as a subset of that is the SB 244 analysis that we have performed as part of our housing element update this year. SB 244 requires cities and counties to look at the infrastructure needs of what is termed disadvantaged unincorporated communities, and thus we have prepared that analysis for you and are presenting it tonight in a public hearing so that the results of that analysis can be made a matter of public record. As we indicated in staff report, the disadvantaged unincorporated communities, there's a formal definition of those communities. Have to meet 3 criteria, which is at least 10 units of 1 unit to the acre density or greater, or within a city's sphere of influence, and also have a median income of 80% or less of the statewide income figures. The SB 244 analysis was provided to you as a memo as attachment 1 to your staff report tonight. At the conclusion of that analysis was that, as defined under SB 244, we do not have any disadvantaged unincorporated communities either within our sphere or even the island communities that could still be located within our city limits. So in order to demonstrate compliance with SB 224, we are asking that you hold a public hearing on the findings of that analysis this evening, although no formal action on that analysis was required by the council. This is a subset of our housing element update for this planning period, and back on May 8th we presented the first draft to the City Council and received your feedback and direction at that evening. We have made some adjustments in the housing element policy and programs in response to the Council's direction, which included clarifying some of the target objectives to make sure that we were accounting for the entire planning period and not just on an annual basis. We made some adjustments in the policy regarding mixed-use development to make sure that it was clear it was going to be happening along West Capitol Avenue and other corridors in our community. And we also made some adjustments to the land inventory to include some properties in the Pioneer Bluff area of town. As also part of the Council's request from the last meeting, we've included a summary of some demographic trends that we've been able to identify through various publications, and those are included as attachment 4 to the staff report this evening. The trends certainly suggest that housing preferences going into the future will certainly evolve as our population age groups change, less households with school-aged children, and also disparities between income levels and housing prices begin to widen. So in summary tonight, staff is requesting that you hold a public hearing on the SB 244 analysis, and then to provide staff direction to submit the draft housing element to the State Department of Housing and Community Development for their review. And then once their review is complete, we'll be returned to the Council for the final approval later this summer. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right, are there questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Mr. Kristoff?
Yeah, Dave, since we lost the redevelopment agency and 20% set aside was a major source of funding for us, what happens with inclusionary housing now? What did you do with inclusionary housing? Do you reduce it?
Well, we plan to amend our inclusionary housing ordinance. That will be something we will be bringing back forward to the Council later this summer to go down to a 10% requirement from our current 15% requirement. And so essentially we'd be eliminating the moderate income requirement and sticking with low and very low, but still have an overall lower requirement of 10% rather than 15%.
Would it be possible to keep the moderate in that 10% and reduce the low or the very low?
It certainly is conceivable. We certainly see that the need is at those deeper targeting levels, and that's also where funding becomes more prevalent, is for projects that do target the deeper levels. At this stage, with where the market it is, particularly in for sale housing, the moderate income prices and what would be the market prices they don't have that disparity. This came up at some of our prior commission meetings, and it's certainly something that we can either look at midway perhaps through this planning period to see if that becomes a need again. But at this point in time, our analysis suggests that the deeper targeting is where the true need is in the real world.
It seems like for some of the larger development projects that if the moderate were left in and the very low or the low, there was some formula that reduces that portion of it by the 5%. It seems like it would be more advantageous for the development community to move quicker so that we could start building our housing stock again. I mean, it seems like it's, I mean, if you're going out and looking at West Capitol Avenue, or you're looking at Sacramento Avenue, or some of the other places where we've put affordable housing, apartment complexes and that sort of thing, I can understand where you're coming from. But I'm looking more broad-based at some of the major landowners out there and things like that, that there may be a little bit of an incentive to get those folks to start to move.
Well, we certainly are reducing the affordable housing, obligation in total, which for some of the large master plan projects, even 5% is not an insignificant, number of units, within a project. We certainly is within our power to make adjustments to the inclusionary housing ordinance to adjust the targeting, that's in there. But we still have a fairly substantial obligation under our arena numbers for this year that do reach the deeper targeting. And currently for the ordinance, which we will be bringing back in final form, hopefully, we certainly did receive support, from the development community on the changes to that ordinance, and also from some of the affordable housing advocates that we have engaged with on that. So
I guess one of the things that upset me very much was the affordable housing advocates. When we were going through the mess of us losing our redevelopment agency, they did not step to the plate at all. They did not try to help us whatsoever. And that's something that's sort of always stuck in my craw, so to speak. And so anyway, it's just that I think that if we can reduce the amount of inclusionary, we'll be better off. Thank you.
All right, any other questions before we open the public hearing? All right, seeing none, then we will open the public hearing on item 11. I have one request to speak. It's by Mr. Lowell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell for the record again. And I noticed, even more so in this day and age, seems to me like more people are living longer, but they need better access to the older homes. And so I think instead of having fewer, we should have more homes built with universal design or wheelchair accessibility to the bottom floor anyway. And I can even remember 60 years ago, most of your service stations had a public restroom. And how many of them have a public restroom today? Probably maybe 15%. And so, and we had, before the redevelopment thing, we had a lot of substandard homes, but at least most of them had working restrooms. So I think we should also take steps to examine how many of our homes today, especially the older ones, have only one restroom, and we should provide incentives to build an extra restroom for the ones that just have one. And if we're in the business of saving water, we should consider widening driveways to provide at least one to two extra off-street parking spaces, and then there'd be that much less lawn to water, so to speak, and save some water in the long run. But yeah, like I say, add a restroom and add a driveway, and that would keep some construction workers a little busy too, and it would help out in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lowell. All right, with that, then we're going to close the public hearing and return to the council on this item. I mean, I'll just say I appreciate the discussion we had before the hearing around the balance. I mean, we have legal authority to do a lot of different things, but that legal authority is not unlimited, and it won't be unlimited if we don't exercise it with some judgment around the appropriate balance between low income, very low income, and moderate income housing. If all cities in California said we are now only going to create moderate income housing, I think we could be pretty certain that something fairly draconian, maybe even more so than what we had under redevelopment, would be put into place in terms of the requirements. So I think we do need to be careful. What's proposed here, and what I know, what you described as being in process at the staff level in the commissions on its way to the council, is a significant change in those policies, and which I support. And they're not as strong from the affordable housing advocates' perspective as they used to be. And that, as Mr. Christoph said, that's partly their fault. I mean, they weren't there when the legislation to repeal that whole framework went away. So I get that, but I don't think we can just sort of legally just do anything. The other issue is a more fundamental one, which is sort of our moral and community responsibility. We have been very clear we want this to be a community that you can spend your whole life in, and that your family can spend their whole life in, even if you just got back from the military or out of college, or you just graduated and you can't afford to buy a house, or if you happen to have gotten laid off at one point in your life, you don't have to leave our community because you can't afford to live here, or you don't have to become homeless, right? That we don't create a place where there's no housing at the wide array of income options that are available. And so, to me, that remains an important city policy. Now, what the right percentages are, and how much we do through financing, and how much we do through inclusionary and other tools. That's, I think, a very appropriate policy debate that we have been having, and that is proceeding through the commissions and the public review process right now as well. But I think the fundamental one is we do have both an obligation and a need in our community for a diversity of housing that serves a diversity of people. And so I think that trying to find the right spot in that continues to be our work. But for me, I would be uncomfortable simply saying that we're not going to create any housing that's affordable to folks that are janitors, or that are nursing assistants, or other occupations that are working hard trying to raise a family, and need to be able to stay in our community while they do that, and while they make the career progression, or when they just retired. And so I think we're striking the right balance in this proposed revision of the housing element in a way that will also get the approval of the state, which it does require still, even post redevelopment, and that so far at least has passed muster with both of the stakeholder groups that are usually the ones that are on opposite sides. And so I think to me that's an indication that we're at least in the zone on this, and so I think this is a good development.
Well, I certainly wasn't advocating eliminating all of inclusionary housing. I just think that if you take it from 15% to 10%, I think that is a decent balance. But you don't take it all away from the moderate. There certainly be some of the moderate needs to be taken away, probably, but there can be a different percentage. Since there's going to be 10% of units are in essence inclusionary, I think that you can really work with that 10% to make it a little more advantageous for the people in the business community to start to develop again. And that was all it was.
If you were actually developing housing, it's not more advantageous to be developing moderate income affordable housing, because your financing options are much more limited. Your access to tax credits and other grants and subsidies are much more constrained. And so if we're really thinking about what's the best thing to accelerate housing development and make it easier and less expensive to the developers of market rate projects, then really honing in on the areas where there are resources available to help, I think is just important part of the equation is what the ultimate rents might be. And also that as I think Mr. Tilley pointed out, the market, at least in parts of our city, in certain parts of kinds of housing, the private market is already producing housing that is affordable at moderate income levels. And so using the power of government to cause more of that to be produced isn't necessarily the optimal choice either, especially if we're able to direct a little bit of subsidy money towards moderate income units that don't need it, and not able then to assist with the projects where it is necessary. It doesn't seem like it's the best alternative. So I get what you're saying, and I think that's what we're trying to do in this policy is to find the spot where both we're serving the needs of the diversity of the community and we're actually getting projects built, right? Because it doesn't make sense to have a really visionary, deeply moral policy around housing affordability if nobody's building anything. And so it is important that we make it affordable. I think we're on the right track. Mr. Johansson.
Yeah, I think one of the things this whole issue of income and who's living in these places, I think we have to focus. A lot of it's based on management of the properties. It's not necessarily the income level of folks. So well-run, low-income places are nice in neighborhoods. But I also think, when we're looking at creating a policy for aging in place and services to seniors, your mothers and grandmothers are the folks living in these low-income homes, people that are on fixed income. So, it is a way to kind of help preserve families, have families stay in, as the mayor mentioned, stay in the city. We also have the issue of by doing this, we're also opening ourselves to state funding. And some cities may completely ignore the housing element, and I think they basically opted out of state funding. But, I don't think it's a good policy. So I think the only real issue would be the inclusionary, and I think within reason, I think we would have a discussion. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to have inclusionary in some places, but you tend to want to have inclusionary in a certain radius of the actual development. Otherwise, you're going to have clumping of affordability in certain areas of town, and that tends to then create its own issues. So, I think it's wise to do this. I think inclusionary is something we'll have to continue to look at as the market picks up, and particularly in the areas, right along the river or some of these other places that I think it'd be really difficult to do inclusionary. But within a certain area from there, we're going to have streetcars in there, which is I think a perfect place for this type of housing, for senior housing, for workforce housing, which is really what we're talking about here.
Are there other comments or discussion? Mr. Villegas?
Yeah, just real quickly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to chime in, first of all, it's a very comprehensive plan, and I want to thank staff and the city manager's office for the work that's gone in. It's a huge lift. It's a lot of, if you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's worth looking at. It's got everything you can possibly imagine relative to creating that sort of that range of housing opportunities that I think we all strive for. I think it makes as the mayor said, it strikes a good balance. It's got some good policies in it. But I just want to echo the idea that the role that we have here relative to this general plan policy and this framework is incredibly important in light of how expensive it is for housing. And we got an item a little later on the agenda that talks about the homeless strategy. And one of the things that we have to continue to keep in mind and keep front and center, and that is creating those opportunities for that transitional housing opportunity that so many residents, as the mayor's indicated, the students, the seniors that come through that need that opportunity to find that affordable, quality housing opportunity that otherwise doesn't exist. So I think I'm very proud of the product. I'm very proud of the work we've been doing to try to hold that line to maintain, and create opportunities, and not just say we want to do it, but actually create policies and practices. And if you read the plan, it lays out a series of things that we do to actually affect the policy, not just simply say on paper, we have a policy when we strive to do X and Y. It actually walks you through methodically the series of things that we are doing, and we're not just saying it, we're actually doing a lot of these things. So I think the staff did a wonderful job of actually implementing what is otherwise a very difficult thing. So thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. Just a quick statement. Thanks to staff for putting this together. And I just want to echo the point I was going to make that Councilmember Villegas made is around the plan and the elements of it. I think that the public did view this and had not even heard of a housing element before. The fact that it does get very specific about items beyond all the conversation we've had on affordable housing and the actual programs involved with that. This actually delves into implementation programs and things we're actively trying to do to effectuate these policies. I just happened to look at the implementation programs around mixed-use development, something we've talked about before, and advocating, in addition to not just say we want more, it actually talks about the steps that the public has to make to improve the West Capitol Avenue corridor, to extend streetscapes, to invite that sort of housing that will add to our city's housing stock. Again, these are kind of things that are in here, so thanks to staff for providing this and being so thorough with it.
All right. Is there any further discussion or a motion?
I'll make the motion.
All right.
Thank you.
It's moved by Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma and seconded by Mr. Johannesson. Seeing no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Item 12 is public hearing and consideration of Resolution 13-6, approving the Grand Gateway Master Planning document. Mr. Bermudez.
Good evening, Mayor, Council members. I've been here, I think, several times. In total, we've had about 7 meetings on the Grand Gateway Master Planning Vision document. This particular document was the genesis of some grant funding that the city received in the fall of, or the summer of last year, and staff started getting going on the project in the fall of last year. We've had 2 workshop meetings, as well as this will be the 3rd council meeting and 2 planning commission meetings. This grant was secured through the ISP, which is an infill streamlining program through the Sacramento Air Quality District, and it is administered by the local government commission. Staff retained a consulting firm, Opticos, to help plan this particular property. The property is at the east end of West Capitol Avenue, and we refer to them in the city as the Tower Court site, as well as the Experience Motel site and the Delta Lane site. What we did with this particular document is we wanted to achieve a goal to reduce vehicle miles traveled and improve air quality. Those are some key specifics per the grant award. So what we did is, through this process, had various meetings, as I mentioned, and then further, we had various discussions with decision-making groups and the community. And just real quickly to highlight some of the key kind of discussion points. One is the creation of this particular document, which is a form-based code type of document. This will establish and set up some good planning principles for future development of the site. It will fall in line with what we're trying to do with these 3 parcels, which is assemble them into some micro village type of project in the future. And definitely what we heard through the course of all the discussion is definitely utilize streetcar with this site, limit parking, and see if we can execute a parking structure on this site as well. In addition, we did hear some discussion considerably regarding the further use of West Capitol Avenue as it travels down eastward to 5th Street in that intersection. And during the discussion with our consultant as well as with council, there was some strong planning direction and strong strategies to maybe take a look at utilizing that in the realm of pedestrian as well as bike, and maybe eliminating vehicular traffic. We had a considerable conversation with the council, and there seemed to be clear consensus from the council to eliminate that particular extension to 5th Street to just, in the future, to just bike and ped. Subsequently, there was capital improvement staff report and presentation by the transportation group of the city that outlined some key costs to improving the Washington overpass, and those were considerable, and it seemed the consensus from the council in April was to, in the future, as we embark on those improvements, to fund for improving that overpass, but just limiting the use to bike and ped. And lastly, during the discussion with council, there seemed to be a very positive focus on what we can do with this site, and staff took kind of your direction, and it wasn't part of the grant package to create this particular chapter, but we went and moved forward with an implementation chapter, which is Chapter 7. And what we included in Chapter 7 is a good level of detail about the historical context of the discussion from all the planning meetings and the community group meeting as well. And then also in that Chapter 7, we outlined an action plan with some implementation strategies to further the site for development based on direction we receive in the future from council. And also what this does is it allows us to kind of tee up the site for potential future grant funding, as well as maybe if things improve, go out and solicit a development group to plan accordingly based on the form-based code and this plan, this vision, to get them to design a project for that key site within the city. So at this point, staff is looking for adoption of Resolution 13-6, approving the Grand Gateway Master Planning document.
All right, are there questions before we go to the public hearing? Okay, then we'll open the public hearing on item 12. Mr. Lowell?
Thank you again, Mr. Mayor. William Lowell of West Sacramento for the record. And even though this goes a little to the west of the property being discussed at this time, I want to make sure that we're still seriously considering maintaining the bus stops in front of the Welcome Grove Mobile Home Park, and again, instead of closing that off altogether to vehicle traffic, I still think we should maintain the westbound feature to allow the buses to come by in front of the park, but again, reduce that speed to 10 or 15 miles an hour and just have it one way, and that would allow for more pedestrians and more bicycle riders. And I think this would also allow emergency vehicles to get in there when needed a lot better, and therefore serve the people, especially those living there and working there, much better. And right now there's no bus stops going eastbound for 40 and 41 in that block, so they could go ahead and take the turn and come around like the other buses do when they're going eastbound, so they wouldn't miss any stops. They could just make their left turn northbound on 15th Street, or 5th Street rather, and again, that I believe would serve the people better. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Lowell. That will close the public hearing on item 12. Return to the council. Other questions or discussion?
I do.
Mr. Christoph.
Yeah, Jim, have you had an opportunity to speak to the Welcome Grove?
No, we have not.
Would you make that effort?
Yes, I believe I talked to Mr. Lucan, and once we get going kind of on the capital side, we'll start engaging that conversation as well. So,
I think he's asking that you do that like tomorrow.
I mean, there's a lot of people that live there, and you know, the Welcome Grove's been there for a long time. They've been very friendly to the city of West Sacramento and everything, and I just want to make sure that it's there's a certain level of respect that we should give for, you know, the folks that have been there for that long, and people that may be impacted that I'm really not sure. There may be a way in which, if we do away with auto traffic underneath the overpass, there may be a way in which those people can, where the Welcome Grove and stuff, those people there can go to 5th Street and then either get into Sacramento by continuing down 5th Street, or make a right-hand turn and get back into the city of West Sacramento, and make sure that it's just not really cumbersome for all those people, because I do have a lot of people that live there.
noted.
So if we pass this, is that too late for the discussion that the Welcome Grove may have?
No,
No.
no, no,
Okay.
no.
This deals with, this is about the Grand Gateway, that side, the non-Welcome Grove side of the overcrossing.
Yeah, correct.
There's two issues at play with the street. One is our master planning process here, but the other one, and the one that ended up, sort of trumping the whole thing, was we don't have $5 million or whatever you said, told us, $10 million, $7 million.
Yeah.
We don't have that we can't afford to make those changes to that overcrossing anyway. And so even if we didn't adopt this tonight, we've still essentially already determined that overcrossing is going to go out of business as a vehicular access point anyway. So I don't think this action itself is causing that to occur, but it's a corollary to that work.
It is. This is, again, a master planning document. It's more of a vision document that sets the stage for actions towards implementation. Really, the discussion with Welcome Grove probably needs to occur with our transportation group, because what's going to drive that really is the Washington overpass and the 5th Street intersection, those turning movements. So, but I think the timing is appropriate now that we have the visioning document as well as the recent traffic data to sit down with both planning and transportation and talk to Welcome Grove.
Yeah, that is important. I'll tell you that my number one email complaint, traffic-related complaint north of the freeway, is the 5th Street Tower Bridge Gateway intersection. It just takes so long, and then it goes green for about half a second. And there's nothing as far as I can tell, there's nothing we can do about it, because there are so many different things entering in that one location. So that would be resolved if we can deal with some of these other issues. But it is definitely becoming a major problem, as 5th Street is didn't used to have that much on it. Now it's a major access point for everything to the north of it. It's a major access point for the Bridge District, and a way to get to the freeway, and for folks in Southport to get to Tower Bridge Gateway. It's become a major connector point for many parts of the city, and so to have it be that dysfunctional of an intersection is a problem. So,
Right thing.
yeah. So other comments on item 12? No. All right. Our motion?
I'll make the motion to adopt the plan.
Yeah, you're moving all the both actions?
Yes, I'll move the
CEQA certification of the resolution?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma, seconded by Mr. Johannesson. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 13 is presentation of the 200-year flood information maps by the California Department of Water Resources.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the City Council. The state has embarked on a mapping effort to map communities in the Central Valley to 200-year level of flood protection. And that mapping effort will be concluded with final maps developed in early July. In advance of those maps going public and being released, DWR has graciously come forward to provide more information on the development of those maps, as well as their implications and what they mean and what they don't mean. So with that, I'd like to introduce Paul Marshall. He's the Assistant Division Chief with the Division of Flood Management with the Department of Water Resources, and he'll give a brief presentation.
Great. Welcome back, Paul.
Hi. I'm hoping that presentation actually comes up on the screen as well. Very good. So my name is Paul Marshall. I'm the Assistant Division Chief for the Division of Flood Management at the Department of Water Resources. And really, the reason I'm here is to give you the details about what's really included in these maps. Knowing a little bit more about how the maps were made, what assumptions went into them, can give us an idea of how the maps are going to be used and so forth. We started this process of contacting the cities in the Central Valley about 3 months ago, mainly because we just didn't want you to become or be unaware that we were making these maps and what they would show. We wanted you to have an opportunity to see in advance what we've got. Oh, there it goes. So why SB 1278 maps? First of all, we're doing them because legislature required us to do them. And legislature required them mainly because last year as they were developing SB 1278, Senator Walk's office got a lot of comments from the local agencies saying that they didn't have 200-year maps and that they really couldn't move forward with a lot of these SB 5 requirements and so forth without those 200-year maps. So they put it in there that DWR was to put those maps together. These maps can be used for general plan amendment updates that I believe West Sacramento is already engaging in. And I think that the legislature thought of these as more or less public awareness maps, a chance to show the public, that they do live behind levees. Much like our flood risk notifications that come out on a regular basis. I'm sure some of you, or perhaps all of you, receive those flood risk notifications. This is along those same lines. The other thing is that I think legislature just didn't want there to be any more delays in really enforcing SB 5 regulations, so they wanted to get moving on it. There may be a couple of local reasons to embrace these maps as well. First of all, they can corroborate some of the mapping that's already being done. City of Woodland and City of Sacramento have been doing some of that mapping, and they're looking forward to seeing some of the mapping that we're doing to see what kind of differences there might be and whether or not those differences can be explained in some of the assumptions. There could be some incentives as well. People might be encouraged to take particular actions for their particular home or businesses by seeing these maps. And it's also a chance for cities and counties to kind of highlight what their flood agencies have been doing recently. So what exactly is what these maps are not is they are not FEMA regulatory maps. And why is it not going? These are not FEMA regulatory maps.
Are these FEMA regulatory maps? It's hard to tell from the slide.
So our big thing was we wanted to let you know that these are informational maps. FEMA is not taking these maps and mapping into the floodplain or anything like that. These are very different maps. These are 200-year maps, and FEMA uses 100-year. These are not done to the FEMA specifications. FEMA has actually launched in a completely different methodology that they have not landed on yet. But what is... there it goes. Okay, what SB 1278 maps is. SB 1278 required DWR to produce these maps by July 2nd for these 10 different cities. These are 200-year inundation maps. All these cities are protected by project levies or state plan of flood control levies. And the maps are also very conservative. Are you flipping these as well? Okay. These are also very conservative. I was wondering how that was happening. First of all, we start with 200-year hydrology. This hydrology is presented by or given to us by the Corps of Engineers. It's been peer-reviewed, and it's using their latest methodology. The second thing is flow routing. It's a very different type of routing than what's been done before. In this particular flow routing, all of the levees upstream of you are considered to be holding. There's no breakage of levees. Even when the water is flowing over them, and for all intents and purposes, they should be breaking. They are considered to be holding. So it's delivering as much water as possible down to the study site, which would be, in this particular case, the city of West Sacramento. And then we're not really looking at existing conditions upstream of you either. The conditions that we're looking at is in the rural areas, we're looking at levees that have been restored to the 1955-57 profiles, and that sometimes never really existed on some of these levees and does not exist right now. And a lot of those levee agencies wouldn't be able to restore their levees to those standards now anyhow. In addition to that, urban areas are being kept at the 200-year level of protection, even if the study area is not. So in your particular case, City of Sacramento, even if it doesn't have 200-year level protection, even up in the Natomas areas, would be considering or would be considered as 200-year protection, the level, the height of the levees and everything else, the strength, at 200-year level of protection, while your study area is not given that. And the last thing is levee failures. Regardless of the quality of the levee, you could have certified levees at 200-year. The law still requires us to break these levees and show you what kind of flooding could occur behind these levees should they break. So it gives us a very odd, idealistic type of floodplain map that really nobody's ever tried to show before. So let me show you a little glimpse of what's going on. So on the left is the draft map as it came off the computers late last week. It's basically showing most of the basin of West Sacramento as inundated. Now this particular case, it shows inundation from several different types of breaks throughout the city. And this is an aggregated map. So so the flooding from one break is aggregated on top of the flooding for another break and so forth until you have this type of a map. Now, for the entire valley, much of the urban areas in the valley are going to be shown as inundated, just like this. These maps will also give you an estimated water surface elevation. We'll be doing some calculations behind that, and we'll deliver water depth estimates to the cities as well, just so you guys don't have to do the math. And this flood inundation kind of exemplifies the gravity of a 200-year event, in different places throughout the city. And that might give residents here some incentive to either purchase insurance or be more supportive of flood projects that are going on and so forth. One thing that this does not show is it does not show any local sources of flooding. So all of that stuff is not included in this modeling. Next. So this leads us to what are our options? Well, this is a chance to let the people of West Sacramento know that you guys are kind of already ahead of the curve. You've completed 3 different levee projects. You've got a 4th teed up with the Southport Levee program. You've been active in the Corps of Engineers General Reevaluation Report, and you've been active in the urban level of flood protection. It's also an opportunity to tell people what kind of protections are going to be available through the regional flood management planning and the Central Valley flood management planning. So click one. The general reevaluation report is due out either at the end of this year or the beginning of next year. And you guys have been actively working on that process, and that puts you way out there as far as getting 200-year protection for the city. And the urban level of flood protection is criteria that are being set up to be able to meet the SB 5 requirements. And your staff has been participating in the development of this, and we're on track to produce this by the end of, well, by fall, really. So anyhow, I just wanted to give you the update on these maps. They're coming out. It doesn't look pretty, but it's an opportunity for us to really tell people that we are ahead of the curve, that we're meeting the SB5 requirements at this point, and you know, we've been actively working on this, and we're not being reactive at this point.
Okay.
Do you have any questions?
Well, first of all, thank you for taking the time to give us an advance look at this, and also for the very understandable, clear, and frank presentation. Because it was, I think, as you pointed out, very clearly, these are incredibly conservative assumptions, right?
Yes.
And
we call it La La Land.
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, it's both a challenge for the reasons that are obvious, which is, okay, it shows complete inundation, and as you said, that's true for most urban places within general floodplains. That reduces the utility of the tool, because we say, okay, what if we make $500 million worth of flood protection improvements? We probably still get the same as long as the assumptions are everyone else has gigantic levees that can never break, that can deliver more water than is possible, actually physically possible in the channel, and we're going to assume that at least one of ours breaks. It's kind of hard to ever get to a different map. So it does. I mean, I know the world you're trying to work in, but it doesn't make them of limited usefulness. I mean, as you're right, you're exactly right. They should be a wake-up call for folks who are unaware, and believe me, there are those who don't realize there are levees that protect our community and others in the valley. But the presentation I thought was really helpful in that regard, and also noting the significant progress that we have been making and are going to continue over the next couple of years on improving those levees.
Great.
Any other questions, or Mr. Villegas?
No questions. Just thank you very much for coming out. I know that it's been a huge amount of work on your agency's part since the post-Katrina conversations that's occurred throughout the state, throughout the country for that matter. But I know that our staff have been working very closely. It's been a long haul, but I know you've been a good partner with us, and appreciate you taking the time to come out and show us the maps that you have.
Yeah, and this is our opportunity to kind of give a quick report card on what we've been doing with the people's money, since Katrina, and how we've been spending it on communities like yours, in real projects, on-the-ground projects that increase flood safety in communities.
Yeah, I would. Thanks for the presentation again.
Yes.
I sit on
Thanks for sitting through it a
Oh,
second
no
time.
problem. Because you guys do. You really do help, and you really do things that are beneficial for the city of West Sacramento and the citizens of West Sacramento. And it's your department has been a real advocate of West Sac-Safka and what we've been trying to do, and we certainly try to follow your lead when we can, and you follow ours when you can, and we've got a very good interaction, it seems. We've got a very good interaction of staff and trying to work through some of these issues, because some of them they're sticky and they're expensive, and sometimes there's people as far as where their homes are located, and trying to work with all of those and to have your guidance really sort of helps us too. So I too want to give you a little pat on the back, and sorry you had to scare the hell out of us, but that's a different story.
Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you for the presentation and explaining to us before they were made public what exactly these are. And I guess a simple question, I know that these maps do not affect Army Corps policies and procedures, but are you giving the same presentation to them? So, I mean, do they understand what these are? And they could certainly influence, and that's kind of...
They have been actively involved in the production of these maps, mainly because they've been a part of the hydrology. So they're very interested to see what the net outcome is in all of these different areas. And I can guarantee you your consulting engineers and others have been actively watching over this process as well, just to kind of make sure that we produce something that isn't too outlandish and everything else. So
And do you have a model that shows what happens to if the peripheral canal runs through West Sacramento and we're inundated in this way, what happens to the drinking water supply for all of Southern California?
One thing I will tell you, though, is that we did produce a model for this whole thing. It's a brand new one-dimensional and two-dimensional model to do this whole thing, and that is available to the city at any time. I'm sure your consulting engineers will probably glom onto it and produce maps using that same tool. It's an up-to-date tool. We put $120 million into this to get some accurate profiles across the land and so forth. So it's a very nice tool to have.
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, thank you as well for your presentations. I know we're all anxious and to get this situation handled, and your acknowledgement that we're ahead of the game in implementing these things. One of the issues we have here is a lot of our funding is coming through assessments and building permits. So at some point, that building is going to happen so we can start backfilling a lot of this work. And so we're really looking forward to the day that we actually have a lot of this behind us so we can start actually moving forward on what we want to do with our city. Some of the things that SB 375 kind of purpose of getting the dense urban environment around existing urban areas, that type of thing. So we're looking forward to at least having a point where we can predict where this is all going, to a point where we can actually start revisiting those issues of the development again.
And my staff would be glad to sit down with you at any time and show you any tools we have or analysis that we have that might help you out there.
Great, thanks.
All right, thank you. All right, that brings us then to item 14, which is consideration of Resolution 13-40 of the West Sacramento Redevelopment Successor Agency, directing staff to initiate the process of refunding of the 1998 and 2004 Series A bonds issued by the Redevelopment Agency of the City of West Sacramento. Mr. Blumberg.
Thank you. Tonight kind of represents a turning point, if you will, with the dissolution of redevelopment, where we start moving from kind of the bad news to a point where we could take advantage of what I call the good behavior provisions of Assembly Bill 1484. So specifically with this item, the ability to refinance outstanding bond debt, and with the next item being able to make determinations about the future of redevelopment assets. And that's made possible by a finding of completion, which we received on May 13th from the Department of Finance. That finding of completion was really triggered by the last payment that we made to the county auditor controller. So, since the beginning of the fiscal year, we'd made payments of roughly $8.7 million from the former redevelopment accounts. But now we have an opportunity, like I said, to see some of the advantages such as they are. And so the opportunity we have is to look at a refinancing of bonds issued in 1998 and in 2004. We believe that we're going to get savings of roughly $7 million net present value out of this transaction, about 10.21% net present value savings on those refunded bonds. And so the annual savings would be roughly $546,000 to $550,000 annually, and about half of that would come back to the city as a taxing entity distribution. So it has a significant advantage to the city of doing this transaction. What's different about it is that it does involve the Oversight Board and involves approvals by Department of Finance. So we did bring this item to the Oversight Board last Thursday, and they approved a resolution that directed us to initiate the process, and hopefully tonight you'll approve the resolution that concurs with that direction. In terms of issues that we have to deal with, first of all, the Oversight Board seems to be very supportive of this action, but we do have a review by the Department of Finance, and Department of Finance will let us know by the end of the day, Friday, whether or not they have any concerns with the transaction, and then they have the opportunity to spend up to 60 days reviewing our proposal. What our consultants tell us is that DOF is now, now that there have been a number of refinancings, they are throwing staff at the effort and that they're supportive because these savings really benefit the taxing entities, and that was the direction under the Dissolution Act. But, we do have a little uncertainty in terms of how quickly Department of Finance will respond. Now, this item would have to go back to the Oversight Board for an authorization to issue the bonds on July 18th. And so that, again, would be another opportunity where DOF has to weigh in on the action. But we think, their opinion on the resolution we just sent them is going to be key. There is interest rate risk. Interest rates, municipal bond index rates have gone up 50 to 60 basis points in the last 3 to 4 weeks. A lot of that had to do with uncertainty about what the Fed was going to do with quantitative easing. In a press conference today, Ben Bernanke said the Fed was going to continue quantitative easing until unemployment drops below 7%. So, hopefully the markets will stabilize and we won't see the increases in rates that we saw. So we're going to keep our fingers crossed there. We have some negative arbitrage on the 2004 Series A's bonds because they're not callable until September 1st of 2014. So we park some cash in an account for a year before we call those bonds. But still, the savings are significant even with that negative arbitrage. And one of the actions we've requested is in the resolution is that DOF look at the issue of reimbursing the successor agency for our costs, the cost of issuance, which would be about $300,000 out of this transaction. And so that's another kind of key action that we're looking towards. So with that, the action you're taking tonight is really just kind of accepting the direction that we received from the Oversight Board, and then we'll get moving on this and try to complete this transaction within the next 8 to 10 weeks.
All right, questions for staff or comments? Discussion? Is that a motion, Mr. Villegas?
Yes, sir.
Let's do it. Is there a second? Mr. Johannesson. All right, so moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion carries. Thank you. Item 15 is presentation on the draft recommendations for the successor agency's long-range property management plan as required by Assembly Bill 1484. Nancy.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. I have a very brief presentation for you that outlines the draft recommendations that staff has been working on for the past few months for the long-range property management plan. That term, long-range property management plan, is defined in the post-compliance section of Assembly Bill 1484, and it explicitly states that the plan must contain two components: a comprehensive inventory that describes the intended uses and zoning, brownfield status, etc. of that property, and then also recommendations on whom and how the successor agency will dispose of that property. The long-range property management plan serves as a sort of reward for complying in a timely manner with all of the requested payments that have been made to the successor agency through the dissolution process. It replaces the mandate that originally Assembly Bill 26 required, that the successor agency expeditiously dispose of property and in a manner that primarily focuses on maximizing value and not taking into consideration any of the local jurisdiction's uses or plans for that property. With the approval of the long-range property management plan, we are now able to take those items into consideration, and it also allows a mechanism for the jurisdiction to retain that property so it can fulfill those local planning objectives. So in order for us to take advantage of that incentive that's afforded by this new plan, we have a time frame in which we have to get the Oversight Board to approve that plan and submit it to DOF for approval. So we have, as Mr. Blumberg mentioned, we received our finding of completion for making our final payments. We have 6 months to prepare the plan and submit it to the Oversight Board for approval and then to the Department of Finance for approval. And we have to also, in that plan, reach a compensation agreement with the Oversight Board and the taxing entities that are represented by the Oversight Board, should the city wish to retain any of that property. And some of the draft recommendations that we have before you tonight for your consideration do recommend that we retain some of the successor agency's former properties. We've looked at 3 primary principles in consideration of what the plan needs to contain in these compensation packages. So we're trying to minimize the impacts to the general fund. We want to make sure that the properties that we do decide to retain have the clearest council vision that can probably most immediately be articulated, and that we can maximize the return to the city for the cost that it will have to output to retain these properties. I have 5 slides that show there's 14 parcels in total. I have 5 slides that have grouped these together for the purposes of our discussion. So if I could have the next slide. We have 2 parcels on West Capitol Avenue that were purchased in the early 90s to eliminate blighting uses. They do have some minor contamination, we think, on them. We've only received a few proposals over the course of the past 2 decades since we've purchased these properties for development, and we see that there's probably minor development potential and it would be long range. We're recommending that you sell these properties and put them out on the open market upon approval of the plan. The Washington Firehouse is the location of the parking lease that we have to support the vacant retail site that's across the street. It's also the location of the Washington Monument and would serve to support the Washington Firehouse if we were ever successful in redeveloping, when we're successful, in redeveloping that structure. We recommend that you retain those assets for use for the parking, as well as to be developed with the housing structure, the firehouse structure. This lighthouse property we're recommending that you sell. According to the records that we can find, it's also an old purchase made in 1992. This was excess right-of-way that was acquired. It's zoned for medium-density residential. We recommend that you dispose of it. This is the Tower Court site that Mr. Bermudez mentioned during the Grand Gateway public hearing. We're recommending that you retain. It's almost 4 acres when you include excess city right-of-way. It does have some contamination, but we do have an ongoing cleanup that we have received a grant for, so we recommend you retain this. These are the Stone Lock properties. This is our largest conglomerate of assets. It's about 200 acres of property, and about 120 acres of it is developable. We're recommending that you retain the lock for public purposes. The law does provide a public purposes use, and we think that we can minimize the consideration that would be paid to the taxing entities for this public purpose. That's the area in black. And the remainder that's covered in red is covered by an existing option agreement with the Cordish Company. Last week, the Oversight Board took an action to validate the action that was taken in 2011 by the Redevelopment Agency and confirmed that this is a valid agreement. It's going to the Department of Finance for review, and we should hear back in about the next 60 days if the Oversight Board's opinion on the validation of this agreement is held up by the Department of Finance. That concludes my presentation on these sites. If I could have my next slide. So we have to have the plan, like I said earlier, approved by the Oversight Board and submitted to the Department of Finance by November of this year. We're going to be going to the Oversight Board with these draft recommendations and asking them to allow us to take certain actions to complete the plan, like entering into professional services contracts for title and appraisals. Next month, we anticipate returning to this board if there's any changes to the Stone Lock properties as it relates to the Cordish option, and we will be back in front of you with a draft report for your recommendation to submit to the Oversight Board in October, and then having their final approval issued in November in time to meet that 6-month deadline. I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Yancey. Other questions? Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, on the parcels that are going to be retained by the city that are where we're going to have bridges built, for example, the Southport Bridge and then the I Street Bridge. What is the implication there? Because I know the Stone Lock there's going to be an easement that's going to have to happen on that. And an I Street Bridge, the reconfiguration of that by the firehouse, how does that impact this? And it seems like it would create a better argument for us to retain that property.
Yeah, and I'm recommending that you retain the firehouse properties. The Stone Lock properties, back in 2011, when we were hearing that the governor was looking at dissolving redevelopment agencies, we actually asked the City Council and the redevelopment agency to enter into irrevocable offers of dedications to account for Village Parkway and the bridge. The Oversight Board acknowledged that both parties had the authority to do that, and DOF actually acknowledged that those were appropriate uses as well. And in fact, Mr. Davidson effectuated one of those IODs for the bridge. And Mr. Tuttle signed that because he had delegated authority that was granted by both the redevelopment agency and the city council to do that. So we feel very confident that the actions that were taken in 2011 took as much into consideration that the Southport Framework Plan and the general plan provided. And I should also point out that the Cordish option does subordinate to those IODs, so they acknowledge that those existed beforehand.
Thanks.
Oh, yeah, I'd also, sorry, excuse me, Mr. Robinson just pointed out, I'd also like to point out I had an error in the staff report. I listed the large Army Corps dredge site as being retained for future development. That's covered by the options. I just wanted to make sure that what you gentlemen saw on the picture is in fact the entire area that's covered by the option.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Villegas.
No, just a quick comment, and I'll let it go. I just wanted to remind folks, this is the advisory measure that came to us in November. Well, the results of the advisory measure that went before the voters in West Sacramento in November, where a resounding 88% of residents supported our efforts to try and figure out how to continue the progress that we've made with what was previously redevelopment and redevelopment tax increment. Now, this is a result of that mess, and we're trying to make sense of these properties. So it's sort of a laundry list of the properties that resulted from all the work that went into sort of creating and establishing, maintaining a redevelopment agency. And now you've laid out pretty nicely kind of an assessment of kind of where we're going to keep or not these properties, and ultimately these funds that we do that result from the work that has gone from disposing of them will continue to do the good work and investing in infrastructure in our community. So it's just kind of a quick snapshot of kind of what this means. Otherwise, it's a lot of code in terms of the conversation, because we're the insiders that been working this stuff the general public doesn't understand. But this is the result. This is the direction, that the end result, end product, if you will, of that 88% support for the advisory measure that was before them. So thank you, Katie.
Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma.
No, thank you, Ms. Yancey, for the presentation and the plan. You know, it is interesting after, you know, when the redevelopment issue came up a couple of years ago, it was hard to envision what this would look like when it would get here. And any thought we had was just drenched with frustration and anger, like this is going to go all wrong. But I really have to commend you and the staff and the rest of the staff, because the plan here, it's measured, it's thoughtful. The way you approach the properties we'll retain, and the properties that we just are best off letting go to the open market. The ones on West Capitol are most prevalent to me. Like, we're just not going to, those don't really provide any strategic value to us outside of, we held them and got rid of the blight, which was the main task at hand 20 years ago when we bought them. So, but anyway, I just wanted to compliment you. It's thought through. Thank you for the clarification on that one property. But yeah, I like the way the plan is penciling out.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when the redevelopment proposal first came forward, this list was 3 times longer. Right? So the potential threat to a lot of assets of the city was severe. It included, rights of way for streets that were halfway done, and for a variety of things that were a major challenge, because they were things that we needed to do. Right, there were parks that we had already committed to build, roads we had already committed to extend, and so we would have been we were concerned that we would be forced under that redevelopment dissolution legislation to quickly dispose of the property. So essentially at fire sale prices, and someone would walk in and buy a future road right away for $10 that we had to have, and then we would have to buy it back from them using the non-redevelopment general fund taxpayer dollars, and we would get, they would sell it to us for $1 million. The potential for extortion was enormous. And so the council and staff took a series of very complex actions over the year to minimize the potential of that occurring, and in virtually every case that has been accomplished, and it's a real testament. I mean, we were one of the cities most affected by the dissolution of redevelopment. We were one of the first to start dealing with it as reality rather than just scream. We screamed about it, but we were screaming and also working. And we were the first one to receive a positive determination from the state controller that, yeah, we hate it, but we are following the law, we are implementing it, appropriately and legally and cleanly, and that's gotten us to the point where we can exercise this level of discretion. And so I want to thank the whole staff team, and certainly the council and the rest of the city for that methodical approach that is preserving in some key places some really important assets for the community without having to go through that extortion process that we were so worried about. I mean, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be doing this. I mean, the West Capitol properties to me are a good example of we should be the ones holding those. I mean, I would prefer not to sell them right now because we'll sell them for next to nothing to somebody who has no vision for them, because there isn't really the possibility to create something amazing in those parcels right now. But there will be eventually, and it will be much easier to accomplish that later if these were held by the public at the same time that all the other improvements need to be made. That's why we bought them in the first place, partly to clear out bad things, but also to assemble the possibility of improvements in the future. But that's just not feasible under this framework says you pretty much need, the default position is you dispose of properties unless you have a really good reason why you have to keep them for right now, for the benefit not just of the city but also of the Mosquito District and everyone else. And so you've pushed that as far as possible, and I think you've done a great job at really minimizing the harm and certainly protecting the assets to the maximum extent possible. So I'm supportive of this action for sure, and looking forward to the resolution on the Stone Lock piece in particular. All right. So do you need a motion for conceptual approval, or was the universal praise enough to?
No, we were just making sure that you were comfortable with how we were proceeding before we started engaging our professional services contracts. So thank you.
Thank you, Kate. All right, item 16 is workshop to consider homeless study progress. And then this is a workshop, and a workshop only with no specific staff recommended actions, but we'll turn to Mr. Johannesson at the end of the staff workshop point, who's been our lead on this work and for both the summary and perhaps a set of sort of recommended next steps and actions that we might take as a city and a council. All right, Ms. Collis.
Thank you. As you just alluded to, we're here this evening to provide an update on the homeless study, which is currently underway at the council's direction, and to seek council's comments on results to date. The homeless study is intended to shine a light on how homeless issues have changed in West Sacramento over the 5 years since the Yolo County Homeless 10-Year Plan study was conducted, and to examine factors that are unique to West Sacramento. The end result of the study is intended to be what we might consider a menu of potential actions addressing homelessness for the council's consideration. The workshop this evening is only an interim progress report on study findings to date, and because there are many different reasons people become homeless. It is a complicated issue and affects a community in many different ways. We are not looking for quick and easy Band-Aids, but for effective long-term solutions, and these take a considerable amount of discussion and consideration. We're privileged to have a talented team of consultants assisting with the homeless study. Scott Thurman and Barbara Fleck, two of our four-person team from Thurman Consulting, are with us this evening. Thurman Consulting has led 3 community stakeholder meetings, recording complaints and concerns from residents living in the neighborhoods most impacted by homelessness. And I have to say we're very appreciative of the time and efforts of these residents who have participated in many meetings and spent many hours with us discussing their concerns. Our consultants have spoken to city staff, police department, and other city departments such as the Parks Department, whose personnel have been impacted, that deal with the impacts of homelessness on a regular basis. They've met with homeless persons living along the river to hear their issues and their needs. And they've conducted numerous one-on-one interviews with residents and service providers. We've also received comments through the city iLights system online. Each of these segments of the community has its own perspective and its own concerns, and considering the many differing viewpoints surveyed, It may come as a surprise that we found a number of areas of consensus. First is that identifying and assisting persons at risk of homelessness before they become homeless is very important. It's well documented that it is much less expensive to provide early comprehensive intervention services to help people through a crisis than it is to provide emergency shelter after they've fallen into homelessness. Persons leaving incarceration and institutionalization also experience a very high risk of becoming homeless, and coordination of discharge planning and supportive services can support successful reentry into the community and reduce the number of people that fall into homelessness. There will always be some people who fall through the cracks of even the best preventive services umbrella. And for those persons, emergency shelter becomes the stepping stone to getting back on track and into stable housing. There are differing opinions regarding the best location and type of shelter for our community, but most agree that some type of emergency shelter is needed in West Sacramento and would be critical to the success of any shelter will be a program that leads participants towards self-sufficiency and permanent housing solutions. There are a number of persons living in motels that cycle in and out of homelessness, but they don't meet the HUD definition of homelessness. However, they are often perceived as homeless by the West Sacramento community and contribute to some of the same issues. An effective homeless strategy in West Sacramento will probably need to include actions for assisting these at-risk persons, even though they don't fit the HUD definition. And also those persons reentering the community from incarceration and institutionalization also don't fit the HUD definition of homeless, but probably need to be a part of this strategy. Another key step will be maintaining housing affordable to extremely low-income persons and persons with disabilities. This housing needs to be linked with the social services and case management necessary to increase the likelihood that they successfully maintain their housing situation and do not end up falling into homelessness, which can also often become a cyclical event. Once a family falls into homelessness, they are far more likely to become homeless again over and over in the future. And we want to try and prevent that by providing affordable housing and supportive services. Even with robust prevention and emergency shelter programs, it's very difficult to help a homeless person suffering from untreated mental illness or who is actively abusing addictive substances. Unfortunately, most mental health and substance abuse services in Yolo County are focused in Woodland. Having accessible mental health and substance abuse services in West Sacramento would greatly increase the success of programs working to move homeless persons into permanent housing situations. The study is still underway. More work is still needed to weigh the costs and benefits of various actions, but we're pleased to find that many community members and organizations are very interested in being a part of the solution. We can envision these concerned and compassionate citizens as a key component in any final homeless strategy. We still have yet to conduct the business community focus group that we will plan soon, and a draft study is anticipated by the end of August. After receiving council and public comment, a final report will be completed in the fall. This concludes my presentation. I'm available for any questions, and Scott Thurman and Barbara Fleck from Thurman Consulting are also available should you have questions.
Thank you, Ms. Collis. Are there questions, staff, before we take public comment? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to introduce Mr. Johannesson, who's been our liaison to the countywide homeless work and has also been convening homeless stakeholders, because we wanted to move to a set of action recommendations or suggested framework for what the council might consider.
Yeah, I think, you know, I know there's a lot of folks here that have spent the night waiting to talk about this, and I certainly want to hear their comments. I know most of the folks in the audience I see have already been in contact with most of us on council, and I think we're pretty well briefed with what the issues are, not only in terms of the impact what's happening with the homeless folks in West Sac, but the impact the homeless folks are having on residences and business in the area. So, I think just as a framework in an outcomes, I think what we're looking at is over the past, really up to this point, homeless services in West Sac have been basically on an ad hoc basis. We've had different people doing different things. We've had over the last couple of years more coordinated efforts on folks cooperating with each other, coordinating services. A lot of the faith-based groups have gotten together and helped the homeless, starting at the feeding the folks at the boat ramp, and then through other expanded services they have. But still, we don't really have any kind of coordinated effort. So, we really have kind of a lot of folks that want to do something, but not a lot of avenues or really focused avenues on how to do something. So, in my view, there should be some type of coordinated system for homelessness in West Sac, and that would help create more efficiencies within the folks doing the services, and kind of, more or less a one-stop shop type place where, if there's something to do with homeless, there's places where people can go to get answers on the issue, what to contribute, what the situation is. The other is, in terms of the need to do something like this, obviously homelessness is not unique to West Sacramento. Sacramento City and Sacramento County also have issues, as do probably every other city, I guess, in the country. So just as good neighbors to Sacramento and Sac County, City and County, West Sac should also have a plan that considers its obligation to help homeless and not just push the problem to Sacramento City and County. So, and then I think the final thing is the issue of transitional housing. I think by and far, and it looks like the comments that we've gotten from the community as well, that there has to be some type of transitional housing, and that's probably going to be the most significant thing that we can do. Of course, the issue is siting it. Or is it going to be sited in a neighborhood? Is it going to be sited in an industrial area? And if it's not sited where people are right now, is how do you transfer people? So that's going to have to be discussed, I think, the location of that. Because I think, West Sac has resources to help homeless. Again, they're a little bit scattered on the service side, but we have the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation, which its goal is to provide very low and low income housing. But folks that become homeless are in a transition stage. Usually I think the typical scenario is someone has a drug or alcohol problem, their family life blows up because they're wearing out the welcome and getting in an abuse environment or whatever. They get kicked out, so they start couch surfing with friends. That wears out quickly. Next stop could be the motels, and they maybe have enough money to stay there for 3 weeks out of the month. So a week they're without a home. That ends, and then they're homeless. So, but the root cause of that is the drug and alcohol dependency. So, one of the things that I think I've heard the group wanting is whatever we do, we have to try to incorporate services to try to address the root cause of homelessness and not just bed people or just feed people. And I know that's a lot of the faith-based groups, not so much in this city, but other areas. I think it's part of their mission, which is great to feed people. But I think the consensus would be to help do something to help people get out of the cycle of homelessness. So, that means getting services, and that means having them at a place to provide services, which gets back to this whole transitional housing issue. So, I appreciate the consultants and the outcomes. I think they've captured those very, very well. We've talked over the last couple of years about emergency shelters. We have a plan, voucher program with the motels to do cold weather shelters. I believe that worked okay this last year. We had some folks that were able to make use of that. But it's really kind of an ad hoc thing I think we threw together, for that year. So all of this is going to have to be coupled with law enforcement. Because obviously property owners have a right to peaceful enjoyment of their property. So we also have to consider the rights of businesses to be able to operate their businesses. We're trying to develop West Capitol Avenue. You know, we're constantly confronted with the fact that we have folks in this neighborhood doing all sorts of things in an area that we're trying to develop. And, you know, that's not fair to the businesses. It's not fair to the residents. It's not fair to what we're trying to do to our downtown area. So kind of the unique thing that's happened over the course of the last couple of years in this whole homeless debate is we've had, there's a lot of people that are interested in homeless. And it could either be folks that, you know, just assume the homeless go to Nevada, put them on a bus and stick them there. To all the way to the side where you have folks that just they're totally compassionate and want to help people. But the interest is of all to do something about it, not just sit on our hands, which, you know, we've been doing. So, you know, I think the goal here would be to have a pathway to help the homeless. I think transitional housing is going to be key. I think it's going to be integrating it with our West Sac Housing Development Corporation. I think it's going to be coordinating the services so we're not scattered all about providing these services, possibly setting up a separate organization to do this that would be allowed to get grants with stakeholders, community-based stakeholders in it, and then also to have law enforcement involved, because I think that's going to be a key to how this happens. So that's just a kind of a preference of the discussion, and I look forward to the comments.
All right. Then we'll go to the public comments. And the first is by Christine Amy.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members. I'm a resident of the Broderick District, and I want to thank Louise. Very comprehensive assessment, and I think it does equally voice our concerns, and it's never been a belief that we do not believe that the homeless people need services. We in fact do believe they need services, and this issue does need to be addressed. We're very thankful and appreciative that the city is now acknowledging that these services do need to be formulated and put together, and in consideration of the residents, location and businesses, and the development of our beautiful West Sacramento. I just wanted to ask the council if you would consider 2 points in the finalization of the assessment, and one is that an inventory be done on the location and types of homeless services currently being provided in West Sacramento. This will inform decisions on the appropriate location of future facilities so that there's not an over-concentration of services in one area. And also, second point would be recommendations on minimum standards for the location, management, and operation of shelters. This would provide some policy framework citing homeless shelters that balances the needs of homeless people with the impacts of residents in a residential area, if that could be incorporated into the final assessment. And again, I wanted to thank you for your consideration, and we look forward to moving forward and addressing everybody's needs and concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So when I biked here today, something flew into my left eye, so I'm having a hard time reading. But so it might be Rami Houston. Rami, oh hi, Rami.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Congratulations to you. I've been going to these meetings for about 9 months now and taking in a lot of information and going on long bike rides and getting out my frustration about what we're dealing with. I live in the Rivers. I've lived there 8 years, and just as the economy seems like it's starting to pick up, I put my life savings in that house. We're dealing with this Broderick Christian Center possibly enlarging, and considering what you just said, I'm going to temper down what I was going to say. So along with what Christine is saying, when you look at that Broderick Christian Center, who puts a daycare center where transient people come? And the information I've gotten from the Broderick Christian Center, they always talk about women and children. And what I see in the neighborhood and what I see in and out of and what our concerns are is with this transient group of people who is by far males. Christine and I bike ride a lot. I'll pick her up on Sunday morning. It's quiet. It's peaceful. She won't even let me say good morning in a normal voice because it's so quiet. I have to whisper. And when we come home, we're verbally abused, threatened. The neighborhood changes drastically. So I would like us to consider, as a community, with all these considerations for sharing housing and making it a family-friendly neighborhood, that we look at who we're working with to make sure that homeless people are getting what they need. We need to be responsible in who we work with to make sure that gets done. And I have been on AFDC. I give money to a local church that puts together food baskets. I get there's a need. I would like to help. It's one of the reasons I'm coming to these meetings. But I hope that we take consideration in who we look at, who we are partnering with to get these services meet. Because what I see is a chronic situation just being continued, not the help that people need to get out of their situation or a desire to get out of their situation. You know, come have a sandwich, but if you do, you have to look at that facility. Have them do some yard work, clean things up. They are not a good neighbor in our community for a whole number of reasons. I thank you for your time and attention tonight.
Thank you. Rita Marie Sargent.
First of all, thank you very much for that wonderful report. And I'd just like to say that my name is Rita Marie Sargent. I am a resident of West Sacramento. I'm also a member of the Our Lady of Grace St. Vincent de Paul Homeless Ministry. And we do recognize the ongoing problems of the chronically homeless and the marginally homeless in our society, in our city. Marginally homeless are the people who are in and out of the hotels, and the St. Vincent de Paul group deals with these people quite regularly. I'd also like to say that, you know, we try and treat our clients with dignity and respect. We're also very concerned about the fact that what do we do for these people, our clients, our neighbors, in the meantime, before a permanent program can be established. Every month we go and feed the homeless. We do provide ongoing services for the homeless. So we really want to be involved in making sure that our efforts can be continued until a more permanent solution can be found. Thank you.
Thank you. And Paul Starkey?
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of the council. I want to thank staff for what really is a good, comprehensive report. And my comments are basically to supplement the report based upon my experience as a member of St. Vincent de Paul here in West Sacramento, my experience as a former legal aid attorney, and to just point out some things that have, to sort of echo some things that have already been said. Turning to page 3 of the report, the bullet points, the findings, under the first section about community support, I think it's important that, as has already been mentioned, that we identify what is being done, because the report suggests that we don't know what we're doing. The community groups do know what we're doing, and we're trying to provide services. I agree, better coordination. But I think we should inventory the services, who is doing what, and what works and what can be better. Under bullet point number 2 about the motels, unfortunately the report seems to suggest that the issue there is people who are disturbing in the motels. I was very glad that Ms. Collins clarified the report that the issue is, as Mr. Johansson said, that the motels are part of the situation. And even though they don't meet the federal standard of who are the homeless, the people in the motels are oftentimes in part of that, in that system. They're going to go from those motels to a friend's house, to a car, out to the street, down to the river, wherever. So I think that we cleared that up. I am greatly concerned about the camping ordinance enforcement, because I had understood that it would be done mercifully and humanely, and I have personal experience knowing that people were given tickets at 6 o'clock in the morning, their belongings put into custody, their dogs impounded, and they were taken to Woodland. We have to rethink this in terms of taxpayer dollars and police enforcement. When are we arresting and booking people for being homeless? We have to take a look at that, and that should be part of this report. Finally, what's missing as a bullet point is transportation. I agree we need to have a one-stop shop in the city of West Sacramento. That's not our history. We're a community of 3 different diverse communities. We have services in different areas. We need transportation to those areas so that when these groups come together and say, I can give you a voucher to a motel, I can get you 2 loaves and fishes in Sacramento, I can get you to these resources, that we have a way to get them there. For the elderly, we need to have resources in transportation. It's good, it can be better. Finally, in terms of the next steps, I really encourage the City Council to direct staff to have even greater transparency on this issue. When the consultant does the reports, when you have these committee meetings, don't wait for the August report. Let us see, put on the website, what are the results? And we can, the community, the people that can't be here tonight at 9 o'clock, they can give you great suggestions about how to solve this. Thank you very much for your time.
Starkey. All right, those are all the requests we have to speak on this item, so we're going to turn it to the council. Mr. Jans, do you want to make any further comments following the public testimony?
Yeah, thank you all for your comments. I think on the issue of ticketing, I think I've talked to the folks over at Loaves and Fishes, and I don't think they ticket any, or they ticket, but what they do is they understand that people go or they won't show, and it's just a cycle that it's not worth the administration to do. So what they're doing is just community service. It's kind of you go in, you get a ticket, you come in and do community service, and you're done. Because, what's the point of having someone with a ticket they can't pay, or in cars, they don't have space in the jails to do this. So, they had to come up with an alternate way. So, and it seems to work over there. But, I totally agree that as we're going through and doing this report, we need to, I'd like to try and get as much continued input from the interested parties as possible. Because I think, one of the things we've done over the last couple of years is at least get a broad-based buy-in to this type of thing, and I'd certainly like to keep those folks engaged in the product. And I think if we just go off and come up with a report and just ignore that process, we may risk alienating some people. And I think everybody needs to stick together on this and see what we can do.
Open up for the rest of the council. Mr. Villegas.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I actually have a few questions, and I don't know who to address them to in terms of the staff report. I guess, Luis, with it, in the report on the first page, it talks about a little bit about the 1.6 million that was available in 2009, and then the 250 West Sacramento residents that received services and rental assistance to help retain stable housing. So I mean, I'm just trying to find or glean on to what has been working, because we hear a lot about what doesn't work. And so as a result of that money and that program during that period of time, there were 250. Did they result in housing, or what?
These are people who were either very recently homeless due to circumstances, primarily economic circumstances, or who were about to become homeless. Services were provided by the YOLO Family Resource Center and Legal Services of Northern California out of Woodland. They provided help for people that were going through evictions, or people that were renting a home that went through foreclosure. They were getting evicted by the bank without due process, that sort of thing. Family Resource Center provided case management. They would, if someone was out of work temporarily, they could pay their rent for a couple of months till they got back on their feet. But it was the stimulus funding was limited to those who were very recently in this situation, and who, with a little bit of help, could get out of the situation. And it turned out to be very effective to keep people from falling all the way into homelessness. unfortunately, it was a stimulus bill, so that stream of funding is no longer available. However, HUD is now changing some of their regulations on what has traditionally been funding for homeless shelter to allow for some preventive services. We're not, I don't, the regulations are still kind of being worked out. We should have been able to do this at least a year or two ago, I think, but it's taken longer for HUD to get that straightened out than anticipated. It's not an increase in funding available in our area for homelessness, but it is a change in the way we're allowed to use it, with a little more flexibility.
I guess I'm trying to find things that are working or things that we should be highlighting or continuing to do in terms of.
Yeah, I think most people will agree that the homeless HPRP, Homeless Prevention and Rapid Rehousing Program, was very effective. It doesn't help everybody or every situation, but it certainly helped a lot of people.
Okay. I just want to make sure, I haven't heard anybody, at least not tonight, or anybody, frankly, for that matter, say we don't want to do something. I think everybody understands the importance of the issue, and everybody wants to do something to help make it better. Just not everybody would probably agree on exactly what to do. So I guess that's to my point in terms of making sure that, as indicated earlier this evening with public testimony, that we do a thorough job of conducting an inventory of the services that we're already doing. I've said that before, and I think that's a critical part of this final, or certainly the draft, and then the final plan, because we are doing a lot. I mean, I think it's easy to just say we haven't done anything, or the plan will sort of magically reveal what we ought to be doing. But I think there are a series of things that we, as indicated in the staff report, that we are doing, and I think ensuring that we have a comprehensive inventory of these services will shed some light on the fact that we are actually doing something, maybe not everything to everybody's liking, but I think we certainly are doing, for a city our size, we're doing quite a bit. Maybe not as coordinated as we would like it to be, but I think that will show in due time. The focus groups, the purpose of the focus groups, and the intent and the focus of that work, what is that supposed to be for?
The business focus group. The intent of that is just to get comments from the business community in areas that have been where they're primarily impacted by homelessness, which would be West Capitol Avenue, possibly some of the businesses over in the IKEA, Walmart area. First of all, to hear their concerns, and secondly, to enlist their suggestions and their support for future actions.
On that last point, I think what has to be asked is if they have suggestions, ideas, and interest enough to be party to the solutions, because this isn't going to be resolved, certainly, I mean, I don't see by us alone sitting up here trying to figure out how to fund it, or by grants, or, I mean, there's going to have to be a larger, broad-based range of support. So I would make sure that at least that conversation or that question is asked as part of the focus groups, to see whether or not folks that are concerned about it, and I think if asked, they're probably going to express that, we also ask them to the degree with which they want to participate in a solution financially, not just what should somebody else do about it. That's it for now.
Pro Tem Ledesma.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to thank Councilmember Johannesson for being out on the front in this issue and working with the community, and also thank all the community members that are here tonight and stayed with us this late. And some of you recognize from our parish community that have done great work, and I appreciate it, and the community appreciates it. I think that's one of the first things I wanted to talk about was what Mr. Villegas just alluded to, was this is certainly not an issue that the city can solve unto itself, and I don't, the language in the report certainly isn't, we know there needs to be better coordination, but I think by what I've seen and recognized in the community, I think a lot of us folks are working on this issue and are eager to move it forward, maybe formalize it some more. So it's just a matter of us getting on the same page with some basic efforts, and so that we're utilizing those efforts and maximizing our efforts to get the biggest impact to the problem. And that's where I want to start in some of the questions I have about some of the next steps. First which is alluded to here, what I would appreciate in the report in August. And and that is maybe some definitions of the populations we're attempting to care for or to help. I've heard through the comments through Mr. Starkey and others that there are different definitions of homelessness or perceptions of homelessness or problems, from the folks that are occupying the hotels to the folks camping on the levee, and to families who just are being evicted from a place because of loss of job or some other traumatic event in their life. But there's different areas and probably different services that are trying to care for those. So I think one thing I would like to see, just sort of, if we could stratify those populations a little bit to better understand, okay, you know, just saying we're solving for homelessness is a rather large issue, and it's a bit overwhelming. But if we kind of carve it down to, okay, there's certain definitions, I think that at least it'll help wrap my head around that issue, the issues a little more, and where we can be strategic with the solutions. So I think that would be one. And I kind of, again, I heard there was a HUD definition of homelessness, but again, we all acknowledge, I think it came up from you earlier, Louise, about the folks that are coming back from imprisonment or whatever, from other services. Those are a different stratification. So again, that would help me to better understand as much as we know. And then the other part of that is, once we define them, then becomes, are they in scope, or are they not in scope, or it's just, there needs to be some sort of prioritization in terms of kind of what strategies will fit who. And I don't want to say prioritization, not the right word, but it's just, they all require something different. And I'm just trying to figure out what's in scope and what's not in this. If we're just talking about the homeless families, that's different than caring for the folks in hotels, motels who are causing issues with business owners that we'll be talking to in a month. So again, just what's in scope, what's not, would be helpful. I think what I might I heard some of the I think the folks had some very good points on what needs to be included in this, and the inventory of current homeless services. I might think I think some of the faith-based organizations already have services. Hopefully that's included in that inventory, and maybe other services from other organizations. Again, I think that would be helpful to make sure that those are addressed, because I see this forming strategy as one as a partnership, and it's not going to be a fully city issue, but others are going to have to help care for, almost like a public-private partnership to address these things. So it's just going to be interesting to see what else is out there, maybe not moved into our city yet, or those services across the river that maybe would come here. Again, those are kind of things that I would be interested in seeing. And I think that's maybe what some of the other folks here have thought about. I do like the idea of, and I don't know quite how it's applied, but the recommendation for minimum standards of service. I think you're exactly right about, and the comments made about the folks who we are enlisting to provide those services, to make sure they hold up their end of the bargain, and they're providing quality, humane, ethical services to folks, as well as stuff that meet our general requirements just to implement. So again, those are kind of things that I would like to see concrete, actions as well in the implementation plan. There are some lofty, that's maybe not the wrong word, excuse me, that word, but there are certainly a need. We talk about the need for an emergency shelter. We talk about the need for other things that are going to cost dollars that we don't have an identified source for yet. I would be interested in an implementation plan that provides us the things that we can get to relatively quickly, even the sort of the low-hanging fruit. What can we implement quickly that we have access to that doesn't really impact resources here at the city or from the other organizations that are involved? And we just had a discussion around the plan we have for the Tower Bridge Gateway development. We had implementation steps. That's what I'm getting at. We need to sort of have those as well. I mean, hopefully that's part of the discussion here that we can take, that the rest of the group can participate and agree to, that we have some things included in there. I did have one other thought. I apologize, but I do want to echo what Mr. Johannesson did say, because I see this as a multi-pronged strategy, because I do think that law enforcement plays a big role, especially around if we include in the definitions the motels and hotels, other types of people that we're classifying as part of the homeless problem, then certainly we need to make sure we include them in any solution. So anyway, those are kind of my thoughts on this. Again, I want to thank you for the good work, and I'm looking forward to this plan developing, and I would encourage the group to stay involved. I know some of you have been working a very long time. I'm looking at a few of you that I know have been out on the feeding the homeless and caring for them, and also participating in this process. So I want to thank you for that and urge you to stay involved. So thank you.
Christoph.
Just a few comments, Mr. Mayor. I guess, first of all, I'd like to thank Mark for all the work that he has done on this issue. It's a very difficult issue. I mean, it's very conflicting. It's a very, very difficult issue. And as the consultant team continues to move forward, one of the things I don't want to see, for me, I don't want to see happen, and that is, don't forget about the residents. It's the residents that are really impacted. I mean, I understand that all the focus seems to be on the homeless people themselves, but I don't believe that that's where it belongs. It belongs on the residents, the people that a facility or the people that these people are affecting. It could be very tragic. I mean, I know that I know the Broderick area fairly well, and I know that there's a lot of people over there that tell me that, you know, people walking into their yards, stealing their shovels, and really falling asleep in their flower beds or sleeping underneath the trees in their yard. Those kinds of things, they really shouldn't be happening. We should be doing everything we can to prevent that. I'm not saying you throw them in jail or anything, but at the same time, that kind of it's not the right thing to do to your fellow neighbors, and especially people that are trying to help you. And one of the other things I think that the consultants need to understand is you don't want to create a place that is a magnet for drawing many, many other people to that area. We need to make sure that, you know, whatever we do, it's done in a manner that shows a little class, and they in turn have to show the class. The people over there tell me that, you know, they receive their sandwiches and they receive their whatever it is, and they just throw the materials on the ground. They don't pick them up. You know, there should be, you know, a trash can or whatever it is. Folks over there are telling me that all the time. And I know there's a lot of church services that really pitch in to try to help. Their heart is in the right place. But the issues are so difficult that a lot of times they really conflict with what's going on within the neighborhood itself. And so, and one other thing is, people were talking about West Capitol Avenue and some other things. One of the other things that other people, especially the business people, need to look at, go talk to the Dollar Tree, or the dollar store, I mean, over there at Big R. And that they could probably give you an earful, I'll say, of some of the things that are going on over there. But anyway, those are the comments that I have, and I just hope we can find a way in which we can make it all work. And I don't know what it is. I do not have that answer. And I know I take a pretty hard line sometimes. but at the same time, I think it's something that is achievable. We can get it to work, but it's going to take a lot of work on a lot of sides. Thank you.
Well, we've had this before the council at least a dozen times, not the same conversation, but a lot of the same themes as we're struggling with this. And since we are all in the same media market, we've seen other communities in our region struggle with it, and it's the same story in virtually every other city in California and virtually every other state in the country, and in most of the Western and non-Western world. Right? This is an epidemic of large proportions beyond our community, and I say that not as a sense of hopelessness, but I worry a little bit about our desire to want to solve everything and to have a consultant come up with more and more and more and more recommendations on the hope that there's some easy or tangible or answer that we just haven't yet thought of that we will come up with. That our city staff, in the small amount of time they have to be able to devote to this issue in a real way, are going to invent something that hundreds of millions of dollars in Chicago and New York and Sacramento and everywhere else has failed to solve. And there really are no examples across the country of sustained initiatives that have worked at dealing particularly with populations of people who are already homeless. Right, the best evidence is for exactly the point that Ms. Collis identified, which is trying to close the gaps in the safety net before people fall into chronic homelessness. But there are very, very few examples, and really none on a sustained basis at scale, of municipal initiatives that really have turned around chronic homelessness. And so we need to be, respect the magnitude of this challenge on the one hand, and also recognize that it is one of the functions that we, at least the everything is connected to each other sort of approach to the problem solving makes a lot of sense intellectually and in our hearts, but everything is not connected to everything in terms of city government. Right? I think after the last meeting somebody said, it was good, the council really revealed sort of the limits of power. Right? Even though there's a lot that we can accomplish as a government, we cannot do and solve everything. And we don't have, there's no such thing as a homeless impact fee, right, that developers pay. There's no homeless utility like there is for water or garbage or any other service. There's no homeless tax. There's no source of revenue to sort of say, let's embark on a comprehensive approach that will provide wraparound services, cradle to grave for everyone. There's no mechanism to do that, even if we thought we had the right plan. And so, both thinking about the enormity of the challenge, but also the very, very severe limits on sort of the resources that we have to deploy. I think we need to be informed by how does it all connect to each other, but we can't let ourselves drown in the interconnectivity of everything. Right? The city is not going to solve drug abuse on a broad scale. We are not going to deal with the 1960s on deinstitutionalization of the mental health problem in our state. We're not going to deal with the overall economic conditions of the United States of America or the G8. That's not within our scope. And so we do need to narrow, as the consultants are doing their work and as our conversations happen, to I think resist our natural tendencies to want to expand our definition of the problem and start to narrow our focus on what are the tangible actions that are within our power, within our resources to actually do, that have a hope of working. And they will not be comprehensive. They won't solve everything because they can't, and because no one has with a lot more resources than we have. But we have to take real actions, because there are these issues that Mr. Kristoff and that we heard extensively at our last hearing, and no one in our city should be waking up with anyone else in their backyard, homeless or not. Right? You should be able to go on your front porch safely and walk to your bike and bike to work or drive or whatever. There are certain non-negotiables around living or working or just existing in our community that are not trumped by homelessness. Right? but for the same reason I'm not interested in criminalizing homelessness, I'm also not interested in saying being homeless gives you a pass to ignore the other laws of our city. That the respect has to go both ways, and is clearly criminal activity that is being undertaken. Now, you might think of it as nuisance criminal activity, but trespassing and theft and intimidation, those are crimes, and they must be dealt with, no matter who is doing them, no matter how badly we feel about the situation. Homeless, poverty, a lack of health insurance, none of those conditions, none of those situations provide an excuse for crimes, especially crimes that affect and are against other people in our community. That's not acceptable. So we have to deal with that. Right? And so as we look at our other approaches, that they are not a way of hopefully someday preventing homelessness so those things don't occur. Yes, they are, but they are not a substitute for actually dealing with those problems as they exist today for people now. And we have to do that, right? While we are looking at the study, while we are doing consultant recommendations, we shouldn't be waiting 9 months or 10 months for hoping that we will suddenly find the holy grail that no one else in America has found, and that until then we're not going to take action on the enforcement side. We must. And learn from the real evidence around what's happening on the other side. Those programs that have shown the most promise have been housing first programs. Talking with other mayors and looking at what have been occurring in other cities, the evidence from the research, not just from what we see on the streets, the evidence around what's worked best. It hasn't worked, but it's worked better than the alternatives. Have been programs that deal, number one, with housing, so housing first, and employment, some sort of either subsidized temporary or regular employment second. 1 and 2, and there's not a close third. Right? There is no program that I've seen or seen any academic research or any other independent research that has shown that it's worked, that hasn't involved those two as its primary focuses, and we have to do the same thing. And dealing then with housing affordability, which I think has been shown repeatedly. The National Homeless Coalition says the same thing. The main cause of homelessness isn't the mental health deinstitutionalization. It's not mainly AB 109. It's not mainly drug use. Those are all associated with homelessness in some ways, but that they're not the cause. The main cause is the economic circumstances and the lack of available and affordable, safe housing. And so we do have to deal with that in a very real way. And that actually is, as we heard earlier, as we did earlier in the meeting, that is within the city's core areas of responsibility, is dealing with the housing dimension of the challenge. So I agree with everything that's been said by my colleagues and that we heard last week from folks from the community and tonight as well. For me, I would like to both narrow the focus so that we can get to areas that we can actually do and expect our staff to execute on, and start to take actions that mean something now for both homeless individuals, for those who are taking the time and to provide services in our community, and for the neighborhoods of our city that are the most disproportionately impacted. We've talked about Broderick. It's not only Broderick. Folks who live along West Capitol Avenue are experiencing many of the same issues, and there are other pockets in the city as well. But we need to deal with the issues for all of them. I very much support the minimum standards idea. We did the same thing for motels. We did the same thing for mobile home parks, and we ought to be doing it for shelters, transitional housing, and for service providers. I think that's an area that we ought to look, both for the neighbors, surrounding neighbors, and clients, and also for the centers to be able to say, look, I am doing exactly what I'm meeting the standards. So please stop harassing me, neighbors. I'm doing the standard, which is what we found. The motels were vigorously opposed to those standards at the beginning, and we've heard not a peep of problem with them ever since, because they created a level, an understanding about what everybody's role was together in providing a safe place for folks in the community. So I think that's a really at least one important step. And as I was saying earlier, I think to me, taking some steps while we think about how we solve everything around poverty and homelessness in the world are important both to learn from and hopefully to be successful, and to show some good faith to our partners, our neighbors, our volunteers, or faith-based community and other service providers that we are actually going to deliver on all of these collaborations and conversations and meetings and public hearings. But there's actually going to be tangible action. I think we owe folks at least that much. So. Right, Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I would agree that this is really an issue of managing expectations. We, you know, I know on the 10-year plan committee at the county level, I think it was originally the 10-year plan to end homelessness, and that ended up being the 10-year plan to make reasonable efforts to reduce the impact of homelessness or something like that. So it's not, I don't think there's any way that we're going to eliminate it completely, and I think we just have to realize that that's not the goal. The goal is to look at the impacts in the community, look at the impacts of the homelessness. So impacts in the community are going to be impacts on the neighbors, impact on the businesses, and those types of things. Those are visible things that I think we have control over, and that's either through law enforcement or another place for folks to go. You know, I totally get where Councilman Kristoff is on the issue of being a magnet. I think we need to be careful not to need to coordinate services with Sacramento. So we're basically doing things on par. And then it's just really a question of the location of the folks at that particular time. So I think we could manage that. You know, the issue of housing and employment, I think are yeah, I mean, that's it. If you've got employment, you've got housing, you're not homeless. But I think there's these impediments to for people even to get employment. That's a lot of that's they can't get off their drug or alcohol addiction. So, you know, they've got to get in a situation where they straighten out. They have a P.O. box where they can actually receive resumes back. I mean, it's complicated. If you don't have a post office box, you can't get a job. You know, so there's just those kind of supportive services that are really needed for someone who's hit rock bottom to pick them up to be able to get a job. And I know Broader Christian Center is doing this. I know there's issues on how they're implementing this. I know there's issues about the impact of the neighborhood, and I totally agree there's got to be something about how you provide these services and being a responsible neighbor, because obviously it's not happening there. So I think, you know, we've just got to, you know, in terms of measurements, you know, I think, you know, we could obviously canvass the services that are out there, canvass as business to see what the situation is. And as we move down, to revisit that in the future to see if the situation's better, and use that as a gauge, at least for the visibility impacts. In the neighborhoods, you know, see if there's, I know that the folks along the river, at least the owners in Metro Place have been saying it's a lot better now. I think that's because of our policing policy. But, you know, still what's happening is people are being pushed out to West Capitol Ave and everywhere else. So it's not like it's solving anything. It's just solving something for one particular area. So, you know, I think we're right to gauge the community, the business community in particular, because funding is going to be an issue, and they've got just as much stake to come up with to help with this solution than the residents do. And you know, they need to kick in for this, I think. You know, at some point we'll see what the and I'm sure they would do it, because it's for them it's just a question of improving their neighborhoods. So the other one thing I wanted to mention is, Louise, what's the percentage of veterans that are in our homeless population? Is it 25%?
You know, I don't think I didn't bring the study with me. It was less than that, but not, it was around 20%, I believe.
Yeah, so a significant portion, and I know there's a lot of emphasis in Washington now to help homeless vets. So there's funding opportunities out there. One of the persons that's usually in this group is a person with the Veterans Administration, and so they've been keeping
Yeah,
tabs.
Reed Walker with the VA
Right.
has come to a lot of our meetings.
Right. So there is money out there. You know, the thing about Woodland, though, is I mean, physically, you have to take people to Woodland. People don't want to do it. Or if they have dogs, you can't take dogs in the buses. I mean, it's really complicated even to provide these services. So, you know, I certainly commend staff and the consultants to move forward with this and take what I've heard, and also my fellow council members to really look at, you know, things that we can implement I think housing is going to be important. I think I had the chance to visit Amsterdam over the last month, and I don't know, it's 300,000 people, but there's no visible signs of homeless in that town, which is unusual because here in West Sacramento, it's more prevalent. I kind of think it's probably housing, and I probably think it's taking care of their mental health people, because I think a lot of this issue started when we started releasing people from hospitals. But that's the way it is right now. So, so thank you for moving forward with this, and I'm looking forward to see what we come up with.
Mr. Villegas?
Yeah, just a final quick comment, Mr. Mayor, if I could. I know the plan is intended to provide us a laundry list of options or opportunities to entertain, or the final plan is supposed to do that. But I guess I just want to reemphasize the importance of the inventory of what we are doing. But I also think we ought to include, I don't want to pat us on the back too quickly, but I think there's value in identifying the work that we have done, which was just addressed earlier in the housing element, in terms of the 95% vacancy rate for the very, very low affordable housing. I mean, I think that should not go unrecognized in terms of the plan. I think if we're going to identify or list options or things that we should do, we should at least be cognizant or aware of the things that we have done. And that hasn't come without pains and work and costs and effort by this body here to say we are committed to figuring out a way to make housing affordable to the tune of $400 a month. And I think, actually I know for a fact that a lot of folks who are using that, who are scraping by to come up with the $400 to find affordable housing unit that is a pretty nice unit in West Sacramento, without that would be homeless. And so I think there is some credit to be had in that we don't just simply come up to the point where we say, okay, the plan now says here's what we need to do, without saying here's what we've been doing. And I think that's a worthy goal to have as part of the plan, to identify what that is that we've been doing to date.
And a lot of times I don't think the city is recognized for the amount of money they've put into homelessness. There's 11 units of transitional housing that the city bought, rehabbed, and turned over for management that's worked very well for, 20 years now. There's the West Sacramento Housing Development Corporation has been coordinating with Broader Christian Center to provide transitional housing in units that were rehabbed with funding from the city. So there are a lot of things that have been perhaps going unnoticed. So we'll make sure that's
right. And I say it for those of us. That's right. And I think for those of us, certainly for myself, I know I speak on behalf of the rest of the council, those that have been here longer. That has come with a lot of angst, a lot of political will to force that issue. It didn't just happen naturally. You go to other cities in the region, they're not doing it because that's a difficult lift. I mean, that's a hard thing to do, to hold firm on those kinds of policies. But I've been here long enough to know that good fight has been fought and won, in my belief, and that needs to be identified. That needs to be recognized for what it has done to affect the very issues that we're trying to address.
Just for the record, the affordable housing has a 95% occupancy rate.
I'm sorry, what did I say?
Vacancy.
Sorry. I knew it was occupancy. I got ahead of myself. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, as the staff report points out, we've actually had a declining homeless census, where other cities in the county, including Woodland, with better access to services, has been increasing. And it's not. I don't want to draw conclusions any more than we've been drawing conclusions from this program or that program, but it is for me at least, is a reminder not to make assumptions about what are the most sensible approaches and what's been working, what hasn't been. I mean, we've been focused mainly on housing. And it's a question we're going to have to ask ourselves when we get further down the line here is, if we have a dollar, should we be spending the dollar on more collaboratives and workshops and meetings, or should we spend that dollar creating some housing, right? Those kinds of questions, because we don't have unlimited resources to be doing all of this. And so I think at this stage, these are the right questions to be asking, but we need to get to the point where we're moving beyond the questions to really going to some answers. And I think even the wraparound services, the LA just completed a pretty rigorous study of 8 or 9 different their major homeless initiatives, and it was the Housing First was the only one that worked. the programs that tried to make it possible, more effective to continue to be homeless while working on those other issues, have all been dramatically less effective. Right, so trying to, the post office box ones, or the ones that are designed to say you can continue to be homeless while we try to tackle the mental health, drug abuse, employment issues, have been, at least the research evidence has shown that they don't work as well as saying housing first. Then once we've got the housing secured, then we're going to work intensively on those. It can't be housing and then good luck, right? That doesn't work either. But the housing dimension is a key part of it, and it's a critical role, as Mr. Villegas has said, that we have tried to play, and we obviously have had some effect, and we need to keep doing it. So. All right, Mr. City Manager, do you have sufficient feedback for this workshop in terms of the progress arc on the work that's ongoing? All right. Okay. Thank you, and thank you to everyone that's been participating in this at every level. Both in the process that we've been doing, we know other people have been, convening groups and meetings, and also actually on the ground in the street, working with neighbors, working with homeless individuals, with your partners and friends and neighbors and fellow parishioners in the faith-based community to try to deal with this. I mean, we're struggling with this, but we know that so many of you that are here and others that aren't, who are struggling with this in a much more real way. Every single day, and we appreciate you taking the time and the energy and dealing with the frustrations of us and everybody else and trying to navigate through what is a really tough issue. But we're committed, I think is clear, to doing what we can, how we can, to be part of the solution with you. All right. Thank you. All right, and thank you, Mr. Johannesson. Council calendar, Ms. Richardson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I just wanted to remind the council that this Saturday is the Station 44 open house. That starts at 10 a.m. And this will be our last council meeting for the month of June. We won't be meeting again until July 17th. On July 9th, we will be having our swearing in of the new police chief. And this is our final council meeting for our current chief, Drummond, who is sitting in the audience tonight. And that's all. Thank you.
All right. Questions on the calendar? City Manager report.
I was just briefly going to
segue to
compliment Chief Drummond for staying with us this evening. He's also hosted many homeless meetings in the community room at PD, and appreciate his tenure here in the city. He's going to be gone on July 5th. This will be his last meeting.
All right. Well, I know I speak for the council, and Chief Drummond, thank you so much for your leadership, for your dedicated service, for everything that you've done in our community. We have a top-notch police department, and you've been a tremendous leader in the department and in city government and in the community, and really appreciate everything that you've done for West Sacramento. Mr. Villegas?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I also want to say thank you, Chief. I know it's been a good run. I know we started in a very different place in West Sacramento when you got here, and I think everybody can attest to the fact that we've come a long ways in our public safety efforts here in West Sacramento. We're a much better and a much safer place as a result of your policies, your leadership here in West Sacramento. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I too would just like to thank you, Chief. We've been through all the different things and everything, but you've maintained a good department. You've maintained a lot of integrity, and for that you're to be complimented. And thank you for what you've done for the city of West Sacramento. Thank you.
Mr. Johannesson.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you as well. And I know you've really worked hard, particularly in the Brighton Broderick area. That's always been, when I first got on council, there was this division between the north and the south was even greater. But I know you were constantly in that area with police outreach, building police relations, and it really has shown there. You spent a lot of effort in there, and I can tell you that the attitude is, from what I'm seeing, is just completely different in the area, and I think that's all you're doing. And I think for me that was huge, and your ability to do that in one of probably the most needed areas of police relations in our city. I really appreciate it.
Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma?
Yes, thank you, and thank you, Chief, for all your years of service and for really taking the time to work with me a little bit early on to understand some of your work. But appreciate all your service and leadership in the community as well as with your department. It's been, you should be proud of your career. Wish you the best in whatever future adventures you have. And thank you for staying up till 10 o'clock with us tonight.
Anything else, Mr. Tuttle? City Attorney report? We have no future agenda item requests. Mr. Villegas moves, and Mayor Pro Tem Ledesma seconds the meeting to be adjourned. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries unanimously. Meeting is adjourned.